Ladies, gentlemen, and rogues of all ages, last season a new build popped up for Rogue that was super interesting, but simply had an extreme struggle trying to get these stats to make it truly take off. This build was quite simply described by many as andariel barrage, because the main interaction that it focused around was the lucky hit chance poison procs from Andariel's Visage itself, combined with barrages, crazy multi-hits and ricochets, as well as the attack speed, creating a very interesting potential synergy between the two. There were a number of issues, though, that kept this from being a properly top build, but thanks to a ton of changes this season, especially the items more than anything else changing, this build concept is stronger now than ever, potentially just being the straight up best build in the entire game. Maybe second best, things haven't quite settled yet, but it is without a doubt the best rogue build this season by a fairly large margin, and that's saying something, as rogue is just one of the most well-balanced classes with a ton of builds that would be considered S tier even among other classes. This one, however, just stands out so unbelievably above the rest of them. That said, this season the big changes really are that we have way easier access to large amounts of both attack speed and lucky hit chance, allowing us to hit an absolutely insane fire rate on barrage, and importantly not only triggering lots of Andariel's Visage procs, but also triggering mixed poison imbuement's cooldown reduction on hit with poison skills, to the point that even with our insane attack speed you never run out of poison imbuement procs, so every barrage is poison imbued even while spamming them, which then leads through our passives to give it bonus lucky hit chance, and then also helps trigger things like Innervate, which is lucky hit chance to gain energy. Something that I'm also exceptionally happy with being added in Season 5 that is a perfect combination with this concept is the umbracrux dagger. This creates a totem on subterfuge skills that reflects 20% of its damage intake around it and lasts for 8 seconds at maximum roll. But this specifically works great with barrage to give you a target to either ricochet into or ricochet off of, and this creates a new sort of comfort this build archetype has never seen, because the only thing that can really ruin you in this build is being unable to hit an enemy, because hitting enemies is how we recover our energy, and spending energy is how we maintain our survivability. It's how we lower our cooldowns, and it's just how we manage to get through things, as a good chunk of our survivability comes from the second wind passive, which gives you a good chunk of your maximum life as a barrier for every 100 energy you spend. So with the umbracrux dagger, especially in an activity like the infernal hordes, which is the endgame thing that most people want to do the majority of in the game right now this season, you can plop this totem down and just sort of use it as an infinite health bar thing to fire into, safely and comfortably maintaining full energy and full barrier even as the enemies die all around you, which would otherwise make you have to change your aim. Of course, you do want to move this thing around, as it does damage things that are near it, and enemies will spawn in different places and you want to keep it on top of them as much as possible, but the fact that this totem can constantly exist within our setup without any problems makes the comfort level of this build skyrocket compared to otherwise, turning what used to be a very high skill floor requirement build concept into this version I present to you, which is extremely comfortable to play and can not only clear tier 8 infernal hordes comfortably, but my best kill time on the Fell Council at the end of this was 28 seconds. A 28-second kill of the tier 8 council fight is blazingly fast, and that is with good enough AoE and room clear to still get 533 Aether on that run, which is mostly just because I only had about 5 of the mid-wave upgrades that I was after. The others were just sort of best of the worst kind of choices, and it's also worth mentioning that my build doesn't even have perfect masterworking. It has pretty good masterworking, don't get me wrong, but not perfect, and I don't have perfect greater affixes or things like that. The point being, though, this build is undeniably ridiculously powerful in every scenario imaginable in the game, and I do have to shout out Averilyn from Maxroll for working out the way that attack speed works a bit more properly in Diablo 4, as a lot of us were before sort of stumped on this for a very long time and had the wrong impression, but this person properly sorted it out in a way that really just sort of unlocked the true power of builds like this by letting us reach far above the prior accepted limit of 100% bonus attack speed. All that said, let's dive into these skill points and where I've put them, the specialization of choice as well, the legendaries and uniques that make this shine, and I should mention that while Andariel's Visage is a pretty much full requirement to use this build, you can make this purposefully as an item with your first salvaged mythic unique, as you get 3 resplendent sparks from guaranteed other places this season. And while I am using 2 other mythic uniques in the optimal version of this build, neither of them is required to use the build to begin with, and I will offer the replacement options for these items when we talk about gear. And it can still take on a tier 7 very comfortably without them. Then we'll dive into the stats that you want for your gear, the tempering affixes to hunt for, and we'll talk about the specific breakpoints that you want to aim for this too. Then we'll go over your Paragon board setup, and then just a bit of how to play it from my time using the build so far. First then, we need to spend 2 points on basic skills, and before you switch into this build, one of the required items will essentially interact with a passive in our skill tree to give us near infinite energy as long as you're hitting enemies, so basic skills don't matter. We don't use a basic skill, it doesn't go on our bar, so just stick 2 points in any of these so that we can unlock the core node cluster. Here we're going to be grabbing only 1 rank of barrage, then enhanced barrage and also improved barrage too. Enhanced barrage increases the ricochet chance to 100% against vulnerable targets, and improved barrage makes every third cast make enemies vulnerable. Our attack speed gets so fast in this build that you can hit 4 to 5 barrages per second, so that's pretty constant vulnerable application. And because I know you're going to be asking, the reason that we only put 1 rank in this skill, despite it being our main used skill, the button that we literally hold down and build attack speed for, is because the actual main damage of this build doesn't come from barrage itself, but from the poison burst proc effect of Andariel's Visage. The use of barrage specifically is both for vulnerable application, of course, and for the ridiculous amount of lucky hit procs that you can get from this skill, firing this many arrows this quickly with this many ricochets, and now also being able to pierce targets as well. So just the 1 point into here, but then we also grab 3 ranks of the passive Sturdy for extra damage reduction from close enemies, which helps a fair bit under a barrier, and then we can move forward to Shadow Step, as well as its enhancement and also disciplined Shadow Step. This is a great movement tool. It gives you the unstoppable buff to break out of crowd control. With our enhancements, it also applies daze and vulnerable and stun to the target that you use it on, as well as lowering its own cooldown by 3 seconds, which means that realistically this only has a 6-second cooldown. This is important because this is our only Cutthroat tagged skill on the bar, and is used to proc bonuses from using Cutthroat skills every few seconds, both from our key passive and for legendary nodes from the Paragon board setup as well, with 6 seconds being within the buff duration to allow constant uptime on these. Then we're going to be taking 3 ranks of the Rugged passive just for a hefty damage reduction increase from damage over time effects, mostly because poison damage specifically of all damage types in the game is about the most threatening thing that there is, and this just helps not break through our defensive quite as badly when we do get poisoned. As the main hurdle in this build is going to be defense, because once you pass that point, once you reach the right set of stats, you become essentially unkillable outside of like the random Desecrator one-shots infuriate hordes that one specific enemy, but even the Council can't kill you, and the Desecrator can only get you if he hits you with something that you should probably be trying to dodge instead of just actively trying to face tank everything. Point being, this passive does help a fair bit, but you will eventually reach a point where it may not even be necessary. Then we are going to be taking 3 ranks in the Unstable Elixirs passive. This is just really awesome now, making nearby enemies get stunned when you use a potion, and also giving you a damage buff for 10 seconds after you drink a potion. This is great in pretty much all content, but especially notable in the infernal hordes because each wave is 60 seconds, you are fully refilled on potions in between waves, so that means if you manage your timers properly, 6 potions means a constant damage buff for the entire wave. Then we're going to be moving on to the Subterfuge cluster of skills, where we're going to be taking, honestly, a hell of a lot. 5 ranks of Dark Shroud, as this is one of our main defensive tools in the build, and I want to be very, very clear from this point that Dark Shroud does not go on your active skill bar. We trigger and activate these shadows from Dark Shroud through the Umbrous legendary aspect, which gives you lucky hit chance with critical strikes to generate a Dark Shroud shadow. And we hit so fast that while crits aren't a focus of our build, we have enough crit chance to make this activate ridiculously frequently and reliably. We also take the enhancement for bonus movement speed and a chance to not consume the shadow, but then we don't take the further buff, mostly because the 10% bonus crit chance can help you if you don't have very high crit chance, but you don't really want too much crit chance either, so this is just sort of a waste of a point once you have the right gear. And the healing from the other option is just entirely unnecessary due to the life on hit that you get from Andariel's and our attack speed. So we leave this where it is and use the point elsewhere. Then we'll be taking Smoke Grenade as well as its enhancement, which makes any enemy hit take 25% more damage for 5 seconds afterwards. Importantly changed from how it used to work, where only enemies that were dazed by the Smoke Grenade would take the bonus damage. This now affects bosses as well as a result, which then makes it much better. As well, the enhancement Countering Smoke Grenade reduces its cooldown when hitting a boss or elite enemy by 5 seconds, and then we get the tempering affix of Smoke Grenade cooldown reduction in a utility slot on one of our items, and this puts its cooldown under 10 seconds. The duration of the damage boost is 5 seconds, the reduction of the cooldown when hitting elites or bosses is 5 seconds, so this creates consistent, permanent uptime on this effect for a singular enemy at least. Then we pick up the Poison Trap skill, as well as its enhancement, and Subverting Poison Trap for a damage boost to any enemies that are standing in the range of Poison Trap. This gives us another reasonably high lucky hit chance ability that gives us frequent damage boosts, as well as stacks well with poison damage being boosted significantly within our build. Then we're going to be grabbing 3 ranks of the Exploit passive for bonus damage to both healthy and injured enemies, and also 3 ranks of Malice for bonus damage to vulnerable and knocked down enemies, importantly applying both bonuses if both debuffs are in effect. And we constantly apply vulnerable and now have knockdown because of Poison Trap. This also applies both bonuses to vulnerable bosses that are staggered, as the stagger counts as being affected by all types of crowd control. Then we're going to be moving on to our imbuement cluster, and here we are of course grabbing poison imbuement to turn barrage into a poison damage machine gun, enhanced poison imbuement for some bonus energy gain on the cast of this skill, and then we also just constantly cast this to refresh the buff, so the energy does actually come into play. Then we also grab mixed poison imbuement for lucky hit chance with poison imbued skills to lower the cooldown of poison imbuement itself, which is why we are able to cast it so often by just holding down the button. Part of the reasons for this are that we also use this to activate multiple of the passives that we'll be talking about in a moment. 3 ranks of Deadly Venom for increase to all poison damage that we do, 3 ranks of Debilitating Toxins to reduce the damage of any poisoned enemy attacking you, then 3 ranks of Alchemical Advantage for bonus attack speed, as well as bonus lucky hit chance every time that you deal poison damage, up to a cap of course. This is one of the 3 most important passives to make this build work properly. Getting bonus ranks of this on your amulet is basically a must unless you replace one of the legendary aspects, and I'll talk about that later. It's not necessarily required to use the build, but it is required to make it better than the other rogue builds, to make it be the best one that we have, and it's one of the main requirements to do so. Then you also want to ideally hit this passive on your amulet with every masterworking proc along the way, as that's important. I only have 2 out of 3 in the footage that you're seeing here, so as you've seen, that is definitely enough to get the job done. It's just slightly below perfect. That said, the main reason that this is so good is simultaneously because lucky hit chance is extremely important for us, but also because the attack speed from this passive stacks separately from the attack speed on equipment. This is one of the attack speed things that I mentioned earlier, thanks to Avaralin, where you can hit 100% attack speed max, which is what we thought to be the actual proper max of bonuses, but there are actually 2 separate brackets in which you can hit 100% in. Bracket 1 includes things like equipment affix attack speed, elixir attack speed, but there is a separate bracket for attack speed that includes things like most legendary aspects, a lot of passive boosts in the skill tree, unique effects, things like that. If you hit 100% in either of these brackets, going past it will not increase your actual attack speed further. But if you instead build more attack speed in the secondary bracket, the aspects, the passives, things like that, those will keep making you attack quicker and quicker and quicker, and so the simple result of this is that you can have this 40% attack speed bonus, 45% if you had the perfect rolls, and that would go on top of the 100% that you would normally get as well. It's worth noting on top of that, if you really want to use this build because you like the look of the gameplay, it is possible to drop one of your legendary aspects and replace it with the accelerating aspect, as our crit rate is high enough to keep this bonus active constantly, even in a non-crit build, and this is also a secondary bracket attack speed boost, so this would enable you to play even if you are lacking all of the bonus alchemical advantage ranks. And this would lower the damage by a reasonable amount to do so, especially with the lucky hit chance loss, but it is an option if you want to run it in a lesser state. Then we're also going to be grabbing 3 ranks of the Frigid Finesse passive. Even though we don't have cold imbuement, we do regularly freeze enemies thanks to our gear, and so this actually does have a noticeable impact too, especially as this also applies the full bonus to staggers on proper bosses, which is very nice. With that then, we'll be moving on to our ultimate cluster, and for our ultimate skill itself, we're going to be taking Death Trap with none of its enhancements. This does pretty solid damage in this build, but again, every skill that we have is here to enable the andariel's proc in some way, either more procs or more damage for the procs. What this does for us, in combination with our specialization, gives us a constant way to reset all of our other cooldowns, which just keeps the build's actual loop properly functioning and lets you infinitely hold down most of the important buttons. Not to mention that this also triggers the No Witnesses Paragon node, which increases all damage you do by a portion of your damage with ultimate skill stat. Then we'll be taking 1 rank of the Innervation passive. This gives you lucky hit chance to restore energy on hit, and you do get extra ranks of this from the umbracrux dagger. Combine that with stupidly high lucky hit chance and attack speed, and that's where we get near infinite energy from, as long as you have enemies to hit with it. Then we're going to be taking 2 ranks of Alchemist Fortune for some bonus lucky hit chance with non-physical damage, boosting all of our poison hits' chances of activating our lucky hits effects. Then we'll also be taking 3 ranks of Second Wind. This is, again, the most important passive for our survivability specifically, and you will want to temper this as a defensive affix onto your pants for bonus ranks too. With there, on 1 masterworking proc and the rest just normal upgrades, it will hit 4 bonus ranks like so. At 6 ranks of this skill, it will give you a barrier for 90% of your maximum life. You get 105% at 7 ranks, though it's important to note that 100% maximum life is the maximum amount of a barrier, so this does overcap a little bit, and this does give you this barrier for every 100 energy that you spend. Again, our main bread and butter is literally holding down a core skill button, so we restore this barrier right around once per second, slightly longer than that, but that means that as a base, whenever this barrier is active, we have literally double effective maximum health, and we restore the barrier to full, essentially once per second. This is the main plug in the rogue survivability hole that would otherwise exist to make us able to just face tank the highest tier of the infernal hordes without much concern. Then finally, for the skill tree, we of course have our key passives, and for this build we're going to be using Close Quarters Combat. This gives you 15% attack speed for 8 seconds after using a marksman or cutthroat skill. You can have both of these attack speed bonuses active, and when you do, all the damage that you deal is increased by a portion of your crowd controlled damage bonus, which is quite nice. That said, the main real reason that we use this is like Alchemical Advantage. The attack speed here, at least from one of these, falls into the second bracket. Specifically, the marksman half does. So this is essentially plus 15% attack speed to our 40% from Alchemical Advantage for 55%, which again is separate to the 100% normal attack speed stat for a total 155% bonus attack speed now, which again would be 160% if you had better masterworking rolls than I do. Past that is our specialization then, which I did sort of allude to earlier, and it's going to be preparation. This makes Death Trap reset every one of our other cooldowns, as well as giving us a pretty nice damage reduction buff on cast for 10 seconds afterwards. Also, this makes every 75 energy that we spend decrease the cooldown of Death Trap by 5 seconds. We literally hold down the core skill button to spam this skill, and so the cooldown reset of this is actually extremely quick because of that, giving it very frequent uptime as a result. With that then, we'll talk about the actual gear that we're using, and before you grumble at me, this is literally the tippity top build in the best shape that I could put it in, the most min-max setup that I could possibly do. It requires a mythic unique to function in the first place, yes, but it also is just so goddamn worth using if you have that mythic unique. Maybe you won't be ready to enter this build tomorrow, but if you can do it in even a week, in 2 weeks, this is the greatest power fantasy that Rogue has access to this season. That said, Andariel's Visage, mythic unique helmet, this is an absolute requirement to use this build, as our main damage source in the build, our main scaler, is triggering the procs from the unique effect of this helmet. The high attack speed affix is great on this too, honestly, and generally the best combo for masterworking procs to get on this is the set that I have. 1 for attack speed to help you reach your first bracket, then 2 for all stats boost. Life on hit wouldn't be bad either, but it just isn't really necessary when considering the rest of the setup makes you mostly immortal anyways. Awkwardly, I have greater affix maximum poison resist on this, which is beyond unnecessary in this setup. Moving on though, there are 2 more mythic uniques that make this build really shine to its fullest potential. These are not requirements to use the build, so I will be offering replacements, but these are what make it able to do Tier 8 chords as comfortably as you are seeing me do them. The main one for that purpose then is Tyrael's Might. This is just an insane amount of survivability in a singular item. 14.6% bonus maximum resistances puts all of them near the maximum resistance cap in the game. 84.6 is what all of my maximum resistances are outside of poison, which is the pure 85. 87% all element resist when masterworks mean that you do not have to worry about elemental resistances pretty much anywhere else in your build really. Then not only is the movement speed option nice on this, but I would rather have that final masterworking proc instead on the general damage reduction stat, as that is quite a hefty amount when scaled up with item upgrades. The effect on this unique is alright though, giving you a little bit of bonus damage, but it's by far not the reason you'd want this item. It's entirely survivability. I would say this is the second most important mythic unique in this build if you have a choice of what to do with your Resplendent Sparks, as it gives you the survivability that you need to do the highest tier content. The damage can come after that, but if you die, you don't do any damage, so survivability first. That said, without having this, you would instead want to use either a chest piece with bonus ranks to Dark Shroud as an affix on it, especially a greater affix if you can find one, and the enshrouding legendary aspect to increase the damage reduction of each Dark Shroud shadow that is applied to you. The alternative to that even is the new Shroud of Acanduris chest piece, which has bonus rates of Dark Shroud on it by a base, but gives you an effect that pulls enemies in and does damage when you evade with Dark Shroud shadows active, but increases your evade cooldown as a trade-off for this. The main shift from my equipment, if you have to change the chest piece to something like this, is that you will need to get your actual element resistances elsewhere. You will still have shadow resistance if you're using this chest piece, you'll still have poison resistance if you're using the Andariel's Visage, but then you'll have to fill out your fire, lightning, and cold. You can do this by using your gem jewelry slots quite simply and just getting your armor from your Paragon board, which you can easily add as well, and I will mention where to do that when we're in our Paragon board a bit later, where you can pick up a little bit extra armor if you need to make this swap. But if you have Tyrael's Might, you just don't need to simply simple as that. Then our third mythic unique for this is going to be the Ring of Starless Skies. This one increases your damage a fairly large amount, but its main addition is the resource cost reduction. This helps us spam barrage as endlessly as we do. That said, this also makes it take twice as many casts to trigger our second wind passive, the barrier passive. Without the resource cost reduction, it would be around 4 casts for the barrier, with a bit of extra to feed into the next one. With Starless Skies though, it's actually 6 casts flat, none to spare, but with the stats that we have, by the time that you have Starless Skies on top of the other things, you will be casting barrage around 5 times per second, so you will still be refreshing this barrier more than frequently enough to be worth the damage gain of Starless Skies being up to a 50% multiplier that also counts for andariel's procs. Not to mention that Starless Skies also has a hefty lucky hit chance affix on it too to begin with, which is one of our most important stats. To replace this, if you didn't have it, you would want a carbon copy of the affixes that I would recommend for your other ring slot, but with either the accelerating aspect, which I mentioned earlier, if you are lacking alchemical advantage, bonus passive ranks on your amulets, or if you have the required ranks, then you can use something like the retribution aspect for chance to stun distant enemies, but also a large damage multiplier increase against both stunned and knockdown enemies, as we apply both of those quite frequently, and again, this will count for staggered bosses too. With that then, let's talk about our more standard unique items, the non-mythic ones, the main required one for this really being Fists of Fate. The main reason for this above all else is the lucky hit chance affix that this has. It can have an incredibly high amount of lucky hit chance. The attack speed is great though, the crit chance only really matters if you're missing Starless Skies, and even then it's of limited value, but then the lucky hit chance to apply a random crowd control effect is also quite good because our lucky hit chance is so high. The unique effect itself also is quite good at high rolls, it's just an increase in your damage. A requirement as far as using this item though and this build is a properly good lucky hit roll on these gloves. None of the other stats on the item are a requirement to use it, but everything other than crit chance just makes you stronger and stronger to have at higher values. The lucky hit chance is the important part. Then past that, we have the umbracrux dagger. This isn't a requirement to make the build work, but it makes the build infinitely more comfortable by giving you a target with infinite health that you can spam barrage into to keep your survival up even when all of your enemies are dead. And because of how branching volleys and barrage works, you still fire out loads of ricochets off of the totem itself, which not only makes the damage close to the totem ridiculously high, but interestingly gives barrage a range that it has never had before, because the main danger of barrage is that you have to sort of shotgun it to actually hit every arrow because it fires them out in a cone, and against smaller targets you still may even miss some at close range. But with this totem, every arrow goes directly into the totem, then ricochets off of it, all targeting a specific enemy because that's how the ricochets work. So these arrows will then chase them down from a screen away. Without this unique, I would just use one of the legendary aspects that I mentioned before to replace Starless, or even something like the aspect of elements for a poison damage boost 50% of the time. Otherwise, match the stats of my other dagger. That said, moving on from uniques, then we have the legendary aspects remaining. On your two-handed slot, you want the creeping death aspect for bonus damage over time for each applied crowd control effect to an enemy, or a flat increased bonus to unstoppable enemies or staggered bosses. This scales extremely well with having high lucky hit chance to apply the random crowd control, as well as all of our forced crowd control too. On the amulet, we have the conceited aspect, and this is just sort of how endgame rogue now functions. We rely on the second wind passive for survival, meaning if you are alive in proper end tier content, you just will have a barrier active. With a barrier active constantly, this aspect becomes incredibly strong, and it's worth noting that we are avoiding things like Edgemaster as an example in comparison, because Edgemaster specifically applies to the damage of skills, and we are instead looking for global damage increases, so things that will actually affect the damage of the procs from Andariel's Visage. So conceited is great for that reason. Then on our ring, we're going to have the high velocity aspect for not only making each barrage arrow pierce once, but importantly making it have up to 25% bonus barrage attack speed, which goes into that secondary bracket once again. So here we go, 100% from the original bucket for bonus attack speed, 40% from my alchemical advantage, which would be 45 if you had perfect masterworking on, or with a greater affix and only one masterwork proc, I should mention as an alternative, an extra 15% from our key passive for 160% total bonus, then an extra 25% because of this aspect would put us at a total of 185% attack speed on top of the base attack speed of a bow. This is just slightly over the final breakpoint that barrage is capable of reaching, as due to the way that the game is coded, if the difference in attack speed is less than 1 frame, it will not actually increase the speed of the attack. So any attack speed past this point is wasted. We then also grab the aspect of branching volleys for increased damage on ricochets from barrage, as well as a decent chance for each ricochet to fire off 2 arrows instead of 1. This both increases group clear damage in general, but also enables our strong synergy with umbracrux. Then for your defensive slot of pants, we have the umbrous aspect for lucky hit chance on crit to generate a dark shroud shadow. This is a really big part of our defensive kit in this build, and the main reason that we have any crit chance at all is to trigger this, but you don't need too much to actually maintain this thanks to both of our attack speed and our lucky hit chance bonuses. Then in our final slot, we have the concussive strikes aspect on our boots for lucky hit chance to daze enemies, as well as increased damage against dazed enemies, which of course also applies staggered bosses once again. Moving on to the actual affixes and the tempering that you'll want to do on all of your gear. Then for your two-handed weapon, you want a bow specifically for the attack speed that it has compared to a crossbow. The stats you want to aim for are dexterity, maximum life, and damage over time, with the importance being in that order too. For tempering, you want chance for bonus projectile when casting barrage, then also damage per dark shroud shadow is the highest scaling additive damage bonus that we can get in the offensive slot for this particular setup. For your dagger, you want exactly the same as the bow really, dexterity, maximum life, damage over time, barrage, double cast chance, and damage per dark shroud. On your ring, you want dexterity as well as maximum life, then lucky hit chance, ideally, with lucky hit chance being the best of the three until you hit 200% lucky hit chance total with alchemical advantage active. If you reach that breakpoint, then dexterity will overtake this for offensive potency. Maximum life for defensive potency. For your tempers then, bonus poison imbuement charges per cast are really important on this one, and you want to hit that most, if not all of your masterworking on this specific item as well, with the main idea being with enough bonus casts of poison imbuement, you will never fire a barrage that isn't poison imbued, which means that you just have higher chances of launching your andariel's proc and just more poison damage in general. For the offense slot then, damage per dark shroud shadow, once again, this is really good. On your amulet then, the most important stat, none of the other ones really matter, is alchemical advantage bonus ranks. If you have that, the other ones aren't important. The important stat is bonus ranks to alchemical advantage. The other things are just a bonus sort of cherry on top. If you do reach that, then also get ranks of frigid finesse. This is the second best thing that you can put on here if you can manage to get both, as we breeze things quite frequently, but things like percent dexterity increase, maximum life gain, and lucky hit chance again are all good rolls to have here too if you can't find those together. For tempering, damage per dark shroud once again, and then bonus charges of poison imbuement again, unless you hit maximum masterworking on your ring, as that would be enough to constantly reset poison imbuement itself with 200% lucky hit chance, in which case you would want trap cooldown reduction instead for both the effects on poison trap and death trap. For your points, what you want is dexterity and maximum life mainly, and you need an armor roll on either your pants or your boots to hit armor cap properly in this build. If not here, you could go for an resistance if you need to fill a hole potentially, or even into bonus dodge chance otherwise. For the tempers on your pants then, you want ranks of second wind. This is a must for your survivability. If you get one masterworking proc on your ranks of second wind, and then no others, it will be +4 ranks to the passive by the time you reach 11 out of 12 masterworking, which makes it the full health 105% barrier amount that you saw in my own tooltip. For the utility slot between your pants and your boots, you want one roll of lucky hit chance to freeze enemies, which is fantastic with our high lucky hit chance bonuses because freeze is just effective as crowd control, but also we have a bunch of damage bonuses to chilled or frozen enemies. But also you want one roll of smoke grenade cooldown reduction to enable infinite uptime for smoke grenade itself. Then on your boots, again, dexterity and maximum life are ideal, with your final slot being either armor, as mentioned before if you didn't get it on your pants, movement speed, or if you are running without Tyrael, something like a greater affix all element resist as an example is a really good thing to put in this slot to help yourself out. For your mobility temper then, you definitely want move speed per dark shroud shadow, simply because even without masterworking procs, this hits 5.8% move speed per shadow. 5 shadows would make that about 29% bonus movement speed, which is far more than any other tempering affix can actually give you in this slot. Finally then, for your gems, you want either skulls or resists in your jewelry to fill your defensive holes, rubies in your armor itself for bonus maximum life, and then in your weapons, what you actually want are diamonds in this build for bonus ultimate damage. You are already typing in the comments, I know, why not amethyst for damage over time if damage over time is our main deal in the whole build? And the answer is the no witnesses Paragon node. We'll be talking about that in a minute, but basically this translates additive ultimate damage into a general damage multiplier for all of our effects, which is worth way more than additive damage over time. Now that we're done with gear then, let's talk about our full Paragon board setup for the build. And from the starting board, what you want to do is go up the right side through the damage and health rare nodes, but you may want to go up the other side if you do not have Tyrael's might yet, because this gives you bonus all resistance. However, if you have Tyrael's, then our elemental resists are more than enough without it, so you don't need that, and you can round through the damage instead. You want to get to the glyph socket, and in here we're going to be putting in the tracker Fire Glyph for bonus damage against poisoned enemies, as well as the important effect of 40% longer duration on poison effects. This essentially translates to 40% more damage against anything that happens to have enough health to survive past what would have been the original poison duration. This just makes it stack much harder upon itself over longer periods of fight and longer enemy health bars. We again then go up the left side, though this is a spot where you can stop for bonus armor if you need it. I mentioned why you might earlier, and if you do, this is a really good spot to do so. And then we go up and out the left side of the board, where we're going to be attaching on the No Witnesses board with the legendary node on the top side. Here you want to go up the left side to get to the glyph socket itself, inside of which we are putting the Fluidity glyph. This gives a bonus to all magic nodes within the radius, as well as the secondary bonus of 10% increased damage and 15% increased energy regeneration for 6 seconds after you use an agility skill. Our agility skill within this build is Shadow Step. You can use it once every 6 seconds because of its own cooldown reduction on itself, so as long as you are actively using Shadow Step, you will have this bonus active. Then you want to grab the rare and magic nodes of note within the radius, as well as going up to the left here to grab these rare and magic ultimate damage nodes to actually fuel the legendary node of the board itself, which we'll get to in a moment, because then you want to go up and out the right side of the actual glyph area, going through the damage over time reduction and the impairment reduction node, and to get to the actual legendary node itself by wrapping around. Here we have No Witnesses. This increases your ultimate skill damage by a further double dipping effect of your ultimate skill damage stat, but also importantly increases all damage that you do by this secondary bonus for 10 seconds after you cast an ultimate. So if you use Death Trap once every 10 seconds, this bonus will be applied to all damage you do, including andariel's procs, and this is why we have ultimate damage weapon gems, as that gains us around a 10% increase to this actual effect in this damage multiplier, which is just worth way more than flat damage over time gain. Then we head out to the right side of the board and stick on the Cheap Shot board over here with the legendary power on the actual left. Then we're going to be grabbing the crowd control damage top rare and magic nodes here, and then we're going to go through the bottom ones for the damage reduction from elites, rare and magic nodes too, before wrapping around to the legendary node itself for this board, which is a 5% increase to your damage for each nearby enemy that has a crowd control effect applied to them, up to 25% maximum for 5 nearby enemies. The full effect will be activated if you have a staggered boss nearby, which is really good for stacking on top of our general crowd control damage bonuses. We then wrap around to the glyph socket itself, and inside of here we're going to be putting in the control glyph for bonus damage to crowd controlled enemies, as I just mentioned, but the secondary effect of bonus damage to chilled and slowed enemies doubled against frozen and stunned enemies. And again, this will apply its full bonus against staggered bosses, which is important because we stagger bosses incredibly quickly. We then are going to be grabbing the crowd control damage rare node and also the intelligence to actually boost this glyph within the radius within reason. Then we head out the top side of the board here through the damage to crowd control enemies even further node and the actual armor that this provides us. And here we're going out the top side of the board to attach on the deadly ambush board, and this is where it gets a little bit funky, and that the actual orientation, the rotation of the board, depends on your stats. If you are under the armor cap, you will want the legendary power to be on the bottom side, right around here, so that you can go through the bonus armor, rare, and magic nodes to get to the legendary power itself. This will use the same number of Paragon points as the way that I've done here, but I don't need that because I've already reached armor cap. Instead, if you have reached the armor cap, what you want to do is orient it like this so that you can get that little bit of trap cooldown reduction from these rare and magic nodes. It's not a massive amount, but it does make a difference and it helps. Past that, once you've gotten those, you want to go up and left to the legendary node itself, which gives you a 23% increased critical strike damage multiplier to enemies that are affected by trap skills. Again, a lot of our damage isn't necessarily affected by critical strikes by any means, but a little bit is, and this only costs a few points to actually grab the legendary node of this board on the path that we would normally be taking for the glyph anyways, because we need the strength to activate it too. Because in this glyph socket, what we're putting in is the Bane glyph, which gives you bonus poison damage in general for every strength purchased in the radius, but also a secondary effect of having a 15% chance of making your poisoning damage effects deal double their damage over the same amount of duration. So essentially this just gives you a % proc chance to double all poison damage that you do, which is really strong. We then grab the damage reduction from trapped enemies rare nodes here and the strength to actually activate the glyph too. Then we're just going to be sticking on a couple more boards for specifically the legendary nodes more than anything else. Down at the bottom of the Cheap Shot board here, we're going to be putting on the exploit weakness board, and then we'll be heading down through the damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, rare and magic nodes here to get to the legendary node itself as quickly as you can. This one itself is a 60% lucky hit chance to gain a stacking buff that increases your damage done. Upon reaching maximum stacks, it will sit there for a few seconds and then reset, so you have to build it again. Our lucky hit and attack speed are so unbelievably rapid that this sits at maximum bonus far more often one, then it does not. Then finally, going back to the no witnesses board here, we put one more board on the top side after this, after pathing through the extra ultimate damage rare magic nodes along the way just because they're there and that is useful. We go through the attack board then to actually attach on the Eldritch Bounty board. Here we are going to be adding a Paragon glyph, so we're going to be going directly to the glyph socket itself and putting in the Canny glyph. This increases the amount of non-physical damage that you do for all intelligence purchased in the radius, and a secondary bonus of giving an enemy a stacking debuff every time you do non-physical damage to them that increases the non-physical damage that you do to them. This will then require the intelligence that you need to actually activate it, but we don't get the rare magic nodes in the radius. Instead, we head through the middle of the board and the increased non-physical damage rare and magic nodes to get to the legendary node itself with our final points to spend on Eldritch Bounty. The maximum resistance does nothing for us because we've already hit max resistance cap, but what this does do is give us a constant 20% increased damage multiplier to our poison damage. You will always be hitting with a poison imbued skilled once within every 9 seconds. The vast majority of our damage in this build is poison damage, and so this is just a massive damage multiplier. That just about does it for the Paragon board setup then. All of your points spent, so let's just quickly round up with how to actually play the build. And it is worth mentioning that a really good elixir for this build is the Elixir of Advantage. Specifically, this gives you both attack speed and lucky hit chance. The attack speed is first bracket attack speed, but the lucky hit chance is great, and this helps especially if you are missing break points for the setup. It is the only advanced elixir in the game that only requires Angel's Breath and Bundled Herbs to craft, both of which drop from the materials chest at the end of Infernal Horde, so it's really easy to have a lot of both. You can get a really constant supply of these elixirs quite easily too as a result. Past that, Poison Trap is a damage boost to things that are in it, but it also exists to put down the umbracrux totem for you. Smoke Grenade is the same concept, though you want to try and target elites or bosses with this specifically when available for the cooldown reduction on it. Shadow Step you want to use on cooldown to keep your bonuses active or to break crowd control if you have it available when that happens. Death Trap you want to use pretty much on cooldown as well to keep the bonuses active, but try to use your other abilities first so that the cooldown reset is actually of use. Then outside of that, literally hold down the button for Barrage and Poison Imbuement, and as long as you are hitting an enemy with the stats and setup that I've shown you here, you will never need to stop. If you put down a Shade Totem, it fills this role as well, so you can just spam into endlessly to actually hit things nearby quite effectively too. That just about does it then. When combined with everything else that I've said, quite a long one today for sure, but this is a pretty complex build, and I wanted to make sure that I went over everything you need to actually understand the value of each part of the setup and why we do what we do, rather than just saying to do things, you know, as this one does require a bit of thought and brain power of when to switch out your gear, what breakpoints you're trying to aim for across stats on multiple items, so I wanted to actually describe the things so that you know what you need to know yourself. It's definitely the hardest build to put together for Rogue this season, but once you have it running, there is just nothing that feels better. I hope you've all enjoyed this then. I know this build has a lot of time investment and RNG required to actually get it up and running, but trust me, it is just so worth it. It may not be something that you could jump into right this second, but it is absolutely worth being a long-term goal for any Rogue player out there in Season 5. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.